Hi there, and welcome to another edition of Israel Explained. Is the United States annexing the Gaza Strip edition? I did not think I would ever gonna say anything like that. So what happened today? Well, we had the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu that everyone was talking about and everyone was expecting to be historic, and it ended up being a lot more historic than anyone expected in a way that nobody expected. So let's jump right into it. Because a lot of people were wondering whether this was going to signal if Israel and Hamas were on their way to a second phase, or if there was going to be an annexation of the West Bank, or if there was going to be an attack on Iran. And the truth is, none of those questions were answered. But a new question was raised that makes all the other questions seem almost irrelevant and antiquated. So what basically happened is Trump suggested today that the entire population of Gaza be relocated elsewhere. He didn't say how that would happen. He didn't say exactly where they would go, and that once they were relocated, the United States would annex the Gaza Strip. Yes, you heard that right. And remain there, controlling it for the long term. So, what exactly did Trump say? Here are some quotes. The transfer of the population, he said, would occur, and then the U.S. could, quote, do something nice, really beautiful, where they wouldn't want to return. Them, I assume, being the Palestinians. He said, Gaza's been a very bad place. Quote, this has been happening for years. It's all death. If we can get a beautiful area to resettle people permanently in nice homes, then they can be happy enough not to be shot, not to be killed, not to be knifed to death like what's happening in Gaza. Right now, you have there hazardous situations in terms of explosives all over the place. And he's not talking about some of the population of Gaza like a lot of people expected him to be. He made it very clear he was talking about everyone when asked about it. He said, quote, all of them. We're talking about probably 1.7 million, maybe 1.8 million. And I think all of them will be resettled in areas where they can live a beautiful life and not be worried about dying daily. Who would pay for it? Well, similarly to the way in his previous term, Trump said that Mexico would pay for the wall, he said money for the project will come from, quote, other people, wealthy nations, and they're willing to supply it, end quote. He did not say who those nations are, considering the closeness of the ties of his administration with Qatar and with Saudi Arabia and possibly the UAE. That's at least what he's thinking, I would imagine, but he did not say. The fact that all of the Palestinians in Gaza would be involved in this at least implies this would not be voluntary, but rather it would be forced. He didn't say that, but that's implied. I think it's important from a legal standpoint and a moral standpoint to be very clear that allowing the people of Gaza to leave Gaza to other places if they so wish is their right. And there's nothing illegal about that. And looking at how Gaza looks right now, it's easy to imagine why someone living there would want to live somewhere else. But forcing them to leave against their will because they're Palestinians in order to bring in other people is the definition of ethnic cleansing and would be a war crime. Now, a lot of people were expecting Trump to talk about removing the Palestinian population from Gaza in one form or another. What he said was more extreme than expected, but that topic was expected to come up. But then Trump brought up something that absolutely no one outside of his close circle, I'm assuming, expected him to bring up. He said, quote, the US will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll love it, and we'll be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous bombs and other weapons on the site, and get rid of destroyed buildings, and create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing. Trump also said during the press conference that that would be permanent. He said, quote, the US will take over the Gaza Strip I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. So this doesn't appear, at least from what he was saying in the press conference, to be something temporary. It appears to be at least the aspiration for a permanent American occupation of Gaza. Um, he says that it will create jobs. He says that it will increase the economy. It's not clear exactly jobs for who, because the Palestinians are not supposed to stay there. Later on, he was asked who would actually live there and if that would include Palestinians. So he said everyone would live there. The world's people would live there once the U.S. was finished rebuilding it. Asked if Palestinians could be among them, he said yes, they could be. It will be an international area. I said everyone will be living there, including Palestinians. But when asked if he wanted Israeli settlements there, he said that he doesn't. That doesn't sit well with his development plans. Settlements are not good for business. So I think the vision he has here, I'm reading between the lines, is of some sort of real estate development, very luxurious, very classy, I'm assuming. Um, and Israeli settlements or Palestinian refugee camps or the kind of things that we usually see in that area wouldn't sit well with this plan. He has a new vision for it. And the truth is, the people who said that what Trump is planning for this is real estate development and that Jared Kushner's discussions of real estate on the beach um, are what's going to happen here, it kind of looks like they were right, at least in terms of how Trump is envisioning all this stuff right now. One of the strangest things about that press conference, there were a lot of strange things about it, was Netanyahu's behavior. Um, he seemed a little bit bemused. It's not clear if he was surprised by the American annexation element. I have a feeling he was. I have a feeling that he wasn't told about that, but maybe he was. Certainly, he wasn't surprised by the rest of it, which we know that they discussed. Um, he didn't say much about it. He did approve of it, though. He said, quote, that Trump has a different idea, and I think it's worth paying attention to. We're talking about it. He's exploring it with people, with his staff. I think it could change history, and pursuing this avenue is worthwhile, end quote. So, not really a full endorsement, but a partial endorsement of Trump's plan to annex the Gaza Strip and remove the entire population. What Netanyahu seemed really busy with in that press conference was, not to put too fine a point on it, sucking up to Trump, talking about how he was, quote, the greatest friend Israel had ever had in the White House, end quote, and listing all of his real and adding several imaginary accomplishments. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that from world leaders who think that that's the best way to manipulate Trump. I have to say that when Trump was hearing this long speech about how great he was, he didn't look that impressed. He looked like he'd heard it before, and he wanted to move on to business. The general appearance that that press conference gave, and I think anyone who saw it would agree, was that Trump was the boss and Netanyahu was being led. That Trump was very much the alpha, Netanyahu was very much the beta in the relationship. It's not clear what was said in private, but whatever it was, it seems to have um, chastised Netanyahu to some extent. And my guess is that he didn't get what he wanted on several things that were on his shopping list. Most notably, an attack on Iran. When asked about an attack on Iran in the press conference, um, Trump made it very clear that he wants to pursue diplomacy first, although he certainly didn't take it off the table. When asked about annexation of the West Bank, we'll talk about that in a minute, that seemed more likely, but he didn't say that he would do that either. Netanyahu may have wanted some sort of assurance that Trump will move towards normalization with Saudi Arabia now and prioritize that over the second phase of the hostage deal, as reports on Channel 12 yesterday said that he would try to get Trump to agree. It doesn't look like Trump agreed to that. So it looks like Trump is doing his own thing. And some of that fits well with what Netanyahu wants, and some of it doesn't. And Netanyahu has just accepted that he has to do what Trump tells him. And that was very clear in the body language between them where Trump was a lot more dominant than Netanyahu and a lot more dominant over Netanyahu than he had been in previous meetings during Trump's first term. Now, Netanyahu got plenty out of this, don't get me wrong. One of the things he got is Trump said that if Hamas does not return all the hostages, he would support an escalation against Hamas and they would pay a very high price. And that seems to go along with the idea of ethnic cleansing of the population of Gaza. Um, Trump didn't rule out deploying American troops and having troops on the ground in Gaza, which it would require to do that, to remove the population that doesn't want to leave. But it sounds more likely that the IDF would go in if negotiations over phase two or over phase three failed, and they would be doing it, and that might be what the high price was referring to, among other things. Now, the caveat, of course, is this is Donald Trump, and he makes very bold statements. Maybe he means them, maybe he doesn't. Sometimes he moves on to other things. And sometimes he uses them as leverage for negotiations to achieve his other goals. We saw that with the tariffs with Canada and Mexico, where he ended up backing off from the tariffs in order to accept what some observers believe was pretty similar to what they were offering to begin with. So there is a chance he backs off from this. Um, the most Machiavellian interpretation of what he's doing here is that maybe he's threatening Hamas and trying to get them to make concessions for the second and third phase and agree to leave Gaza. Because right now it doesn't look like they'll agree to leave Gaza. But if they feel that there's a credible threat of ethnic cleansing and wholesale slaughter of Hamas and their families and so on and so forth, then they might be more willing to make concessions. So if that's the case, we're talking about some very extreme but possibly effective brinkmanship in negotiations. But it's also possible that he's being serious about this. And if he's being serious about this, Netanyahu is certainly not going to stop. What's fascinating is how much support this move is getting in Israel. I've been watching Israeli social media. I've been watching the Israeli news. Very few people in Israel are against this. And that includes people on the left. The extreme left is, of course, against this, calling it ethnic cleansing, so on and so forth. But a lot of people in the moderate left are for it. And one of the most interesting things I saw was on Channel 12. They had Arad Nir, who's a foreign correspondent, one of the more left-leaning people in mainstream Israeli media. They asked him what he thinks about what Trump said, and Arad Nir said quite simply, quote, the success of Trump is the success of Israel, and the less I say about that, the better, end quote. It really shows how much Trump has won over the Israeli populace. His plan has won over the Israeli populace. Israelis are really sick of the Palestinians and they want to see them gone. Now, as far as the West Bank is concerned, that was discussed before this historical press conference. Trump said that he will be making an announcement on the matter sometime in the next 4 weeks. He said, we've been discussing it with many of your representatives, and that, by the way, includes settlers. You're represented very well, he said to Netanyahu, but we haven't taken a position on it yet, end quote. So he's been talking to a lot of people who want Israel to annex the West Bank and hasn't made a decision. If he makes a decision to allow Israel to annex the West Bank, what we could be seeing is a dramatic attempt to resolve, quote unquote, the Israeli Palestinian conflict by changing it demographically. If 2 million Palestinians are removed from Gaza, the Jews will have a much bigger majority. Right now, they might have a minority, but Jews will have a majority between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. And that would make permanent annexation and integration of the West Bank, especially once you have that precedent of ethnic cleansing. So you could see at least partial ethnic cleansing from the West Bank, guaranteeing a permanent Jewish majority between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. So we could be seeing a complete change in the conflict to what would basically be complete Jewish dominance over the historical land of Israel and Palestine. So really, you couldn't think of a more dramatic press conference than the one we've just seen, but it could be the opening bid of some sort of negotiation. What we're going to see now is the Arab states standing up to Trump and trying to convince him not to do this. Because if the Arab states are allowed to do this, allow this to happen, their population will be livid. They're also concerned about being forced to take Palestinians. Palestinians in Arab states have often led to instability. We've seen that in Jordan. We've seen that in Lebanon. We've seen that in Kuwait. So, for various reasons, they're going to oppose this. The Gulf states have a lot of pull with Trump and with Witkoff. So the next thing to watch is how much pressure and how successful is it on Trump to back away from this. A lot of that will also depend on how serious Trump is about this. We don't know the answer to that yet. But I'll be following this very closely here on Israel Explained. So keep watching. If you like what I do here, support me on Patreon. Consider listening to my History of the Land of Israel podcast. I'm going to be having some exciting announcements about that podcast soon. I'm looking to expand it. Um, Thanks to your support, I can do that. So, next time something interesting happens, I'll be here, and I hope you have a wonderful day.